I give this example all the time. Having been both the video game business and in the television and movie business, video games are very interactive. Users are completely in charge within the mechanics of the rules. No video game ever made anyone cry. It's not because people aren't killed or they don't play it enough.
Except when you lose.
No, they don't cry. And their heroes get killed, no one cries. It can't capture that emotional spirit, which narrative can, precisely because users aren't in charge. And so I think, maybe it's what Bob would say, it depends on what we mean by in charge. But I think, there's a lot of things that people like to consume where they're not in charge. And I think if you put users in charge of comedy, all the jokes would fail, right? Let's pause right there, It's sort of, it wouldn't necessarily work. I'm sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, the other thing too is that in an environment of plenty, the user gets very confused. I was in China in the mid-'80s, and you could have whatever you wanted as long as it was the state-produced thing. And I ended up in Hong Kong, and I decided to eat a candy bar. And I was in a 7-Eleven standing there for 45 minutes staring at candy bars. The clerk actually asked me if I needed help. Little did he know he was right, but in the wrong area. The reality is that in a world of infinite choice, the user can't be in charge. My mother doesn't want to sit there and say, what do I want? That's the whole problem. She wants to have some sort of interaction and knowledge, and there's got to be something in between her and the content, because in a world of infinite choice, you need editors, and the editors become very important. And we can't, this is where I think that we have certain naivete about things, but the reality is those editors have an incredible amount of value. And if we destroy those editors in this sort of let's let the consumer run everything, I don't think that that's really a sustainable model for anybody at the end of the day.
We can have a different model of editors or curators, though, as we have more choice. And if you had a candy guide who could help you to the candy that was just right for you based on your previous candy habits, it would work. And we're obviously going to need that as we get more and more content that's available. Consumers are going to need help finding things that are relevant for them, and that will come from much of the same sorts of analysis that are appropriate for helping. It's not just the advertising messaging; it's the core media as well that will be decisioned based on data.
Conrad, let me ask you a question. We hear a lot of talk about people saying, wouldn't it be better if television behaved like the internet? I keep reading articles where people on the internet are asking, wouldn't it be better if the internet behaved like television?
Well, they're not saying, oh, I wish targeting was just like television.
We want to measure engagement, we want to measure impressions.
They're not saying that, but I think certainly there's a lot to be learned from the model. The internet has obviously driven quite hard towards direct response compared to television. And for the amount of time that we all spend consuming media on the internet, it doesn't capture a representative share of brand dollars. And part of the reason is it's difficult. It hasn't got the metrics, it's more fragmented, it hasn't got the buying mechanism that makes it easy for an agency to deploy budget and reach a large number of people, which many of the brands want to do. So I think there's certainly lessons to be learned there, but I also think, what we're talking about is sort of the digital video ecosystem. And many of the things we do will work both on television and on the internet, and who knows where it ends up, whether things just end up being delivered by IP and it becomes much easier to make decisions about which content or which advertising we're going to deliver. So I think there are lessons from both that are really valuable, and our industry will improve by taking the best of both worlds.
I was just going to add that the internet painted itself into a direct response corner early on by producing click-through metrics, and I think it took them a long time to even go after some of those branding dollars. And when people start talking about, I want to click through off the remote control, that scares me, because there's the majority of the money is in branding, and if we really push ourselves with click-through metrics, I think we'll do the exact same thing that the internet did to itself early on.
I was just going to say, as an MSO, and we have both broadband customers and traditional cable customers, I think there is going to be a merging of those two technologies, and we think that people will actually be able to kind of narrow the content they'd like to consume and then go watch it on their television. So I think these two things are going to eventually combine and give you the best of both worlds.
The discovery program for what I want to watch on television will be my iPhone. I'll flip through it and it'll tell me what I want. I'll press the button and it'll appear on the television.
And we sell phone service too, so we can just pump that right over there.
If they're in a Comcast footprint, I think.
Oh, yeah. That's no competition here.
One of the questions I hear often when people are discussing addressability is that there are a lot of people who use addressability as that dog food model You know, if I'm a buyer and I'm selling dog food, I only want to buy dog food buyers, and that automatically leads to cutting up the inventory among multiple advertisers. Other people say, listen, for the people who use television, they're very broad audiences, and we can segment within the audience. So if I'm Home Depot, I have a product probably to sell to anyone. Or if I'm a financial services company, I have something that's relevant to almost everyone in my audience. Given the complexity of the first model, but the demand from the buy side, which is a very loud voice, just curious going around the room, what starts off first? Is it one advertiser, one spot, or is it multiple advertisers, one spot?
Well, I can kind of answer that easily from an advertiser's perspective. We're still very siloed. So we're siloed by product groups, and that's how our budgets come along. And so if it was an addressability issue and we could buy a program and advertise one product after another, it'd be very hard to do because we're not segmented. The products would not agree with it, and if it was a top-down directive, I don't think there'd be compliance and it would be bucked along the way. So I think that if the question you're asking is, will the inventory be split up across multiple advertisers for addressable? I think that's probably the way it would work with an advertiser because of the budgets. But I also think that, I lost my second
Well,
point.
it sounds like it would be very hard, even with Wachovia, it'd be very hard to do, let alone with multiple.
Absolutely, because of the way we're styled. And maybe in the long run, it won't be that way. As addressability becomes the model and interactivity and e-commerce, et cetera, people will start to reorganize, but in the short term.
I'm still making up my mind.
No, that's such a cop-out.
I don't know. It can go either way.
All right, we'll wait till we get to the panel and come back to you.
Well, it's funny, Lisa, from an agency perspective, I would have thought the opposite. So for us, it's actually easier, as we're doing a test now, to have an individual advertiser so that we can marshal out the messages from that advertiser's perspective. So it's
For a test, I can see
yeah.
that you can marshal the resources around that issue, but for day-to-day, I think it's very hard to get the consensus with all products.
She said you're incredibly intelligent, Matt, and that was a great point. No. What she said was, for a test, yes, I can see why you'd think that, but beyond the test, it'd be much harder to organize around that.
Wait, and you said one spot, one advertiser, or you said the other one?
Let's start again. I said I would have assumed, given that we are doing a test right now, that it would be easier to control were it to be one advertiser and then split the communications that one advertiser wants to have across a variety of audiences and geographies.
It must be easier for when you're launching a new service and there's a limited number of people participating. That's going to be easier until you have liquidity and you've got lots of participants. And then there's all the added complexity of just things like inventory management, all those things that have got to be developed to really support multiple advertisers on the same. The same spot and so on.
But I also think that if we're going to get the 90% of the inventory on board, which is the content providers, I think we have to imagine that world, the versioning world of this. And then that's not to say that there's not going to be value created from efficiency. Someone's going to believe in it. I don't know, there may be, and someone's going to believe in it, but it needs to be the players in the value chain who stand to gain the most. And I go back to, why not the agencies, why not this becoming the new basis for competition of the agencies in the next 20 years, right? Arguably, they need it. They need something, and the agencies could take that risk on, and because the MTVs of the world aren't going to. I don't know.
Yeah, no, this problem, I remember sitting in the office with Yael talking about this and going, this gives me a headache to even think about it. I mean, look, TV targeting right now is fairly archaic. I mean, we partner with Visible World, thank God, and that allows us to do some really innovative things. But in general, we can't even get the right, if you're a P&G and you have a female-oriented product, it should be in a female-oriented show. And the reality is that cable networks don't even have that sophisticated of inventory management. And so when the notion of splitting up a piece of inventory amongst multiple advertisers, when we sell over 2.5 million units a year, becomes really a challenge. And for any of you in the audience that's an entrepreneur, you can go figure that out. There'll probably be a big market opportunity for that. In the short run, I agree that the agencies could potentially buy blocks of inventory and in their own house figure out how to allocate it amongst their client base. That would be one way of doing it. But our view is that it'll start with one advertiser with multiple versions.
I was going to go with it depends. Can I go with that one? Or no?
It depends on.
No, I think it's one advertiser and slicing up that way. I think that's the only way it's going to work. I think it is a technology challenge, and I agree completely. If somebody can solve this, it's a huge, huge opportunity.
Okay, Val, it sounds
And if
like
you do solve it, I'm definitely getting a cut of the company. So thanks.
Okay, Val, your take on this?
Bob was just saying I do that for a living. I mean, I think, yeah, so I agree with the panelists in terms of, one advertiser, multiple versions. I think there are other ways of targeting, obviously, contextual targeting, keyword targeting, which are really very easy for many advertisers to do simultaneously. I think at the end of the day, it's a spot. You can slice it and dice it in, I think, at least a dozen different ways. And I do think that as you have more and more video being produced, even outside of the television medium on the internet, if you have metadata about that video, you can search and discover, and you can really do very good contextual targeting.
Dan Conrad, real quickly, because we have to wrap up.
Sure. One point for the cable industry is that I think that the investment they've made in their networks over the last N number of years is going to be useful to allow them to do all these things and make it easier at the end of the day to do all these things. I agree that it's ultimately going to be initially going to be one advertiser.
And having jumped in inappropriately earlier, I'll say a second thing. Never mistake a clear view for a short distance. There's a lot of things that have got to be put in place to truly get to a marketplace where multiple advertisers can get access to the audiences they want, and that can be delivered. And I think we have to take steps, we have to show value at every step of the way. So we should do the things that can be supported today, that do add value to all participants, and learn as quickly as possible.
Listen, thank you very much. I thought it was a fabulous panel, and I hope the audience enjoyed it. And I appreciate all of you participating. Thank you.